Well, hello there, climbers. Welcome back to another episode of Classic Climbing Book Review. Today we'll be taking a look at Basic Rockcraft and Advanced Rockcraft by Royal Robbins. These books came out in the early 1970s, and if you were a climber from that era, these were your guide. This is what you look to learn how to climb. Royal Robbins, of course, was a pioneer of the golden era of rock climbing from the 1950s up into the 70s, and he was also a prolific writer. These books really serve as a look back to what climbing was like back then. Of course, some of the material is outdated, but some of it is still relative today. You won't see anything about a belay device in here. They were using the hip belay. You won't see anything about camming devices. They were using pitons. But what you will see is an insight into the ethics and the values of climbing that Royal really laid down then that still exists today. Basic Rockcraft has information to kind of just get you up to speed to maybe follow a rock climb or go out and top rope, whereas Advanced Rockcraft really gets into the nitty-gritty of big wall climbing and leading. Let's take a look at Basic Rockcraft first. Here on the front page we see Tom Frost, one of Royal's main climbing partners from the era. I'll take a look at that. 4-Cole, good climbing, Royal Robbins. Ditto, Tom Frost. Pretty cool. I got to meet Royal Robbins when we did an interview with him, and he actually sent me over to Tom Frost's house that day, which was really neat to meet them both. This is a book by Royal Robbins, as we said, and it's illustrated by Sheridan Anderson, who is a really cool character, and his illustrations really bring out the character of this book. Otherwise, it'd be a little dry. Royal Robbins is kind of a dry fellow, but Sheridan, not so much. Published by La Siesta Press in 1971. And there's Royal, there's our man Royal. In the introduction, Royal tackles the all-time question of what is rock climbing? A boy clambers barefoot up a tree. He does it for the pure joy of climbing. Why doesn't matter. It is exciting, new. There's a bit of danger, the thrill of adventure and going somewhere he has never been. He might do the same on a building or an easy rock cliff, and from this raw beginning springs a desire to venture onto steeper walls, smoother ones. He would go there, but he can't, not without boots, rope, and perhaps pitons. The game becomes complex, but the point is still the same, adventure. Well, I think that stands true to today. It's an interesting thing that kind of harkens to modern climbing. As rock climbing is to mountaineering, so bouldering is to rock climbing. Originally conceived as training, it now has adherents who rarely stray more than 30 feet vertically. To the rock gymnast who specializes in bouldering, the drama of climbing high above the ground with its potential danger and variety of demands upon the human character and abilities mean less than the intensity and joy in the ever finer perfecting of gymnastic moves on rock. See, even back in 1971, bouldering was coming up, and now maybe it's one of the biggest forms of climbing there is. This is interesting, and I still think remains true. He says, "You'll never know how much you can do until you extend yourself to the limit. And you don't know that until you fall trying. That's the key word. Most people fall off a practice climb only after they have given up, and they never approach their real limits. Give it all you've got. You're now in the thick of the game. Self-confrontation and inner conflict, the only part of the sport, are nevertheless an inevitable part." Again, rings true today. This is interesting. He talks about footwear. Tennis shoes or hiking boots will suffice. But ultimately, he says, the shoe makes little difference. Far more important than the efficiency of the shoe is its psychology. If you think you have the best shoe you can get for the job at hand, and if you have faith in its performance, then that is the shoe for you regardless of theoretical considerations. I think that's true today too. Now what's interesting here is back when I heard about, oh wow, they did all this crazy free climbing, using hiking boots. I kind of pictured a hiking boot kind of like this, huge and clunky. But in this book we see that actually these were pretty performance-oriented boots, and I could see how you could actually do some pretty high-end climbing. I mean, look, that's a small sole right there. I was picturing something much clunkier. See, this is what I mean. Look how technical that hiking boot is. I could actually imagine climbing pretty hard in that. Look at his edging right there. Here he talks about the rope, difference between a twisted rope and a kern mantle. They did have dynamic stretchy ropes back then. They were just getting into that, and he goes on to speak on that. This is interesting. He talks about carabiners, and carabiners should test to at least 2,500 pounds. Well, I think they're quite a bit stronger today. It's an interesting photo because here he's got a bunch of gear, but what do you not see? I don't see a rope. What are you doing up there, Royal? Here we see he starts talking about certain knots of the day, popular, a lot of which still remain, such as the figure 8 here and the fisherman's knot. People still use all those, and the prusik. There's a cool picture of him aiding up some what looks to be quite heinous crack. Here's where it gets interesting, belaying. What we don't see in here is any belay device. They were still using the hip belay. So he talks about all the different ways to hip belay. Wrap it around you, wrap it just around your back. Pretty sketchy. Certainly ain't no gree-grees in this book. The sitting hip belay, belaying the leader, the standing hip belay. This is funny, in a section talking about a dynamic belay, he says that if the leader really needs a dynamic belay, it will be provided by the rope being ripped willy-nilly through your hands, which is why so many belayers wear gloves. Here he calls out some of the climbing signals that people still use today: belay on, climb, climbing, belay off, rope, slack, tension, rock. A shout of warning similar to 4 in golf. Shout it loudly upon dislodging a missile. Oh boy. Here he gets into some of the type of protection that they had back in the day. This is what they had to protect them when they were up on El Cap. No cams, no trick micro nuts. It's good old fashioned metal. So I've got a couple examples here. An angle piton, looks like this. This one was made by Royal's client partner, Chenard. We've got bongs. Looks like this. Pound that bad boy into a crack, huh? How do you like to carry a rack of these? This thing's kind of heavy. Again, made by Chenard. Knife blades. Look at that. That's what it looked like. Here's a section on rappelling where he describes the popular method of the day, which is called the dolfer. This is the classical method and the one to learn first. Straddle the rope facing the anchor point, bring the rope around the left hip, across the chest, over the right shoulder, and down across the back to be held in the left hand. This is the braking hand, and the right is used mainly for balance. How'd you like to be doing that a couple hundred feet off the deck? I'd probably need a cigarette too. Here's where we start getting into more traditional style rappel device. There it is, carabiner brake rappel. Probably the closest version of how we rappel today. This guy's going to meet a girl, I think. He's got a rose in his mouth. Double up and double check. There are over a dozen ways to get the chop rappelling. He uses that term quite a bit in this book, get the chop. That means bye-bye. There's a picture of our man Royal on the lead. Here he talks about face climbing. Interesting that he calls one of the basic form is the cling hold. Never really heard of that before. But he does call the jug a thank God hold. We still use that, or bucket. Look at this pinch grip. Looks like something you'd find in a climbing gym. So this is interesting. He talks about crack climbing and jamming, and just like today, he says that of all the free climbing techniques, jamming is the most difficult to learn. First because it's strenuous, and more important because it is totally foreign to our experience. Cling holds are understandable. Here's something one can grab. But jamming must be deliberately learned and fostered. We all know those people that climb pretty hard but can't jam to save their lives. Looks like it was the same story back then. Here's a section on chimneying. Definitely a technique you need to know in Yosemite. Again, we've got a illustration by Sheridan Anderson of a gentleman smoking a cigarette en route, and he dropped it. Something must have got scary. Section on slab climbing. Again, this is similar today. Slab climbing is a special art, different from face climbing, crack climbing. The expert slab climber is distinguished by grace and a cool mind. He does not rush. He looks ahead carefully, calculates his tactics, and acts with resolution. His footwork is neat and deft, for he realizes the importance of precise use of holds, and he concentrates totally on the problem in front of him. Another shot of Robbins, either soloing or bouldering, I'm not sure. Robbins, while mainly known for big wall, traditional and aid climbing, was also a pretty accomplished free climber. Don't forget that he did the first 5'9" using all free climbing techniques. He was no slouch. Now here's where we get to the real meat of the book and what's relevant still today. Ethics and style. Royal Robbins is a huge proponent of clean climbing. He did not like overbolting that was popular in his kind of nemesis, Warren Harding. And this is where he kind of lays down the law. And a lot of what he said here, we still adhere to today. Actions which directly affect others in the climbing community are properly questions of ethics. Several might be considered, but we will be concerned with only one. Preservation. The primary ethical consideration involves leaving a route unchanged so others may enjoy, as nearly as possible, the creation of those who made the first ascent. Through the years, there has been controversy over questions of placing and removing bolts, as well as other questions such as destroying holes or creating them with the pick end of the hammer, aka chiseling. And you can tell the Royal was conflicted about this. He knew that he says, climbing in good style is admirable, but must everyone be forced to do so? Opposing these super purists or extremists of the opposite bent who insist all routes should be accessible to all persons. A compromise is in order, one based upon a simple point of reference. So, like I said, back in the day, back in the golden age, it was Royal Robbins and it was Warren Harding. Royal Robbins was a little bit of a goody two-shoes. Warren Harding's was a bit of a madman, a maverick, and they clashed, they butted heads. And Royal didn't like telling anybody what to do, but he kind of knew that he needed to, otherwise this rock could just get absolutely destroyed. Proper, improper. Skirt, I don't know. And this is what I mean. Here he writes an apology. Writing this last chapter has been difficult and painful. It involves do's and don'ts, obligations and responsibilities. Most climbers are individuals who love freedom. They climb because it makes them feel free. We may expect then that having others suggest how they ought to climb will rub wrong. There used to be so few climbers that it didn't matter where one drove a piton. There wasn't a worry about demolishing the rock. Now things are different. There's so many of us, and there will be more. A simple equation exists between freedom and numbers. The more people, the less freedom. If we are to retain the beauties of the sport, the fine edge, the challenge, we must consider our style of climbing. And if we are not to mutilate and destroy the routes, we must eliminate the heavy-handed use of piton and bolts. This could say an apology. This could also say, Dear Warren Harding, because this is basically written right to him. And that concludes Basic Rockcraft. Now we'll take a look at Advanced Rockcraft. This one came out in 1971. This came out in 1974 and goes into a lot more detail. We're going to skim through this one because it's a thicker book and a lot of it is outdated as far as techniques, but it's still a wonderful look into how things were done back then and the history of our sport. Now what's really interesting is this starts out, the person that gave me this book had a clipping in here for an obituary of Sheridan Anderson. Sheridan Anderson, again, is the one who illustrated this book, and he was quite the character himself. I'll put a link in the description where you can read more about him because he was a stark contrast to Royal Robbins. He liked to drink, he liked to party, he didn't climb that much. Here in the obituary, what's it say right here? He stayed up most of the night sipping on Jack Daniels, or was it wild turkey, pulling tales from the well of his experience. Fishing was his love. He was both its prophet and disciple. He was really known for this fishing book that he wrote. He hung out with the climbers more than he actually climbed, but he was a really interesting dude. And sounds like he was a lot of fun to party with around the campfire. Got Robbins to sign this one for me as well. Keep on climbing. Oh, I guess 1973, not 74. And look how many pages this bled through. Sitting there for so long, but it even bled through to... Yeah, that's interesting. This introduction is pretty funny. But I must warn the reader not to expect much from this book. I offer no easy solutions, no real shortcuts. The burden of this book is that climbing, even fun in the sun rock climbing, involves anguish. I have yet to meet a climber who does not occasionally experience it. Well, I think that's still true to this day, isn't it? Chalk craft, clean climbing, putting protection in the rock and taking it out, leaving the rock how you found it. The essence of chalkcraft is art. With pitons, one can attack many a pitch with little fear, little art, little skill, yet with impunity. Again, might as well just say, hey Warren, you've got little fear, little art, little skill. Come on, man. This is a deeper game we play. This cartoon by Sheridan Anderson is hilarious. Like I said, Sheridan Anderson, this guy, was funny, man. Take a look at this. Beautiful. Tug, tug, climb, climb. Oh, the last frame. Where'd he go? Look at that cool old picture showing how it was done. Another funny comic. Guy falling ass over tea kettle. Now, here he talks about RERPs. I think we skipped over this in the last one, but a RERP is a realized ultimate reality piton designed by Yvon Chouinard. And he says one of their great virtues is they can punch their way into seams that are not really cracks. And when you see a RERP, you'll see what I mean. Or you'll see what he means. Look at that. Imagine punching that into a crack and then hanging your body weight on it. The realized ultimate reality piton. RERP. Here he talks about blobbies, smashies, bashies. A malleable piton made of soft metal, usually aluminum. It's like this. Pound it into a rock. Smash, smash, smash with your hammer. It deforms into a little thing, like literally like the seam of this book. And that's what you step on. Still used in hard aid climbing today, but not as much. There's a picture of the RERPs. That look just like that. Pretty interesting. It talks about sky hooks, useful tool for aid climbing, invented by Jim Logan. Something kind of like that. Hook over something, hang off it. Look at that old twisted rope. Old picture of Chouinard. As I said, this book goes into a lot of big wall climbing. So here's a funny little section about helmets. You'll never see a picture of Royal Robbins in a helmet as far as I can see. And why? This is what he says. The problem with helmets is they are a bother. Yeah, true that, man. And he goes on to theorize like, well, does a helmet help, or does a helmet make you feel safer so you do dumber stuff? That was kind of his feeling on the matter. Now here he goes into leading. Why lead, he asks. The mystique of first on the rope has a romantic aura, but little necessary relation to the joy of climbing rock, whether leading or following. And on a good route, one can find a lot of excitement without going first. But someone must go first, and there are those who love the special demands made only upon the man on the sharp end. Here's Royal on one of his free climbs at Lover's Leap, possibly Fantasia. So check that out. Royal Robbins bouldering in the buttermilks. Pretty cool. Here we've got a little section on free soloing. Free soloing is attractive not for its safety, but for the joy of moving competently and unfettered with only the belay of one's mind and body working smoothly to produce an art. To be high above the ground, yet be in complete control. But know that such control comes only from mastery of the rock and of oneself. And he talks about the dangers of competition in free soloing. Sometimes waves of soloing competition will pass over climbing centers as the stars try to outdo each other in pushing the fine line. These waves pass as by and by the soloists feel the old reaper looking over their shoulders, and they look at the rocks below and realize that only a moment's lack of concentration, a split second's faltering in will or attention, and they will be off the rock with the ground coming up very fast. And all because competition led them to try what they wouldn't have attempted for pure joy of climbing. Even if he attempts only what he knows he can do, there is still a way to get the chop. The terrible thing about free soloing difficult routes that are within one's capacity is the chance that faced with the ultimate danger and the need for the ultimate self-control, one's nerves might fail and cause an error. That's the irony of it. The fear could short-circuit skill, that one would die as a direct result of being afraid to die. So before you take leave of your friends, consider well the seriousness and the possible consequences of going alone. Now here we go, he goes into values again, talks about new routes or creation, first ascents are an art, don't hurt the rock, don't overbolt, style is important, ethics are important. And the book ends with what he says, this chapter, which follows a story of a climb, is included in the hope of giving life to some of the dry instructional prose which has gone before, of conveying some of the reality of the climbing experience, of showing some things which give rock climbing its richness, of indicating why I love it. And this is a story about his first ascent in Tahoe and Lover's Leap of a route called Fantasia. I'm not going to go into it, but it is a pretty cool story. This ends with this nice quote, good climbing and good company often go together. Each is essential to the enjoyment of the other. Tom Patey. And that concludes Advanced Rockcraft and Basic Rockcraft. Now, what I think is particularly cool about both of these books, along with providing an insight into what climbing was like back then and an insight into Royal Robbins' values and personality, is that you can find both of these books online on Amazon or eBay for relatively cheap. And I think they make a great first book for a collection. If you'd like to start a climbing book collection yourself or just want to flesh out one you've already got going, I think these are two essentials. So check them out, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of Classic Climbing Book Review. Tune in to the next one. Thanks for watching.